I have no mouth, and I must scream. I will admit this game that was released in 1995 did not appeal to me at first. I have to admit that is in lieu to the box art, as even the title didn't necessarily make sense to me at the time. Now, this is before I even heard of the short story by Harlan Ellison, who, it should be known, also worked on this game. If you have not read or heard I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, I do recommend it. Brace yourself because it is also disturbing. And the game does pretty much follow a lot of the key aspects of the short story. However, it does develop the backstories of the characters in the short story a bit more. Now, when this game was originally proposed, the writer Harlan Ellison did have key work in it. And ironically enough, he this adaptation was typed up on a typewriter. He didn't use computers for it. He just typed it up on a typewriter. And I know many of you cannot fathom that, probably because you have not seen a typewriter. But this was the thing we had before word processor units and word processing programs in computers. But as it goes, it was part of how he worked. And when this was originally scripted, there was not supposed to be a good ending for it, which held it very true to the original short story. However, he did, possibly reluctantly, added a good ending scenario or scenarios. And many of the endings in the game mirror the ending of the book or of the short story, which the title is basically the ending line. Now, I do recommend listening to this short story. I'd recommend reading it if you can't listen to it. You want to really get an immersive feel, you will find a version of it read by Harlan Ellison himself, which is a very, very entertaining read because you get so much life put into the characters that way. But back to the game, of course. You see, for 109 years, and our fact listed in the story, the last 5 human beings have been tortured by this supercomputer, AM. And then the short story explains how AM came to be. This is probably even one of the early depictions of artificial intelligence taking over. AM has a hatred of humanity. And the only reason he keeps 5 people alive is so he can torture them endlessly. And like he said, he's been doing this for 109 years. And so he decides to play a little game with each of these 5 remaining survivors by setting up a scenario for each of them, possibly to give them hope that they can end their suffering. Something Am is not about to do. But to give them hope that it could happen, well, that's a plus for them, and that gives them more reason to endure his little tests, or his little games. And each scenario is specifically designed for each character to inflict them with their fears, to confront them with their past, to expose them to it. And it's quite ironic because these scenarios, the short story never specifies a time that this happens in. All you're told is they've been alive for 109 years. And if you pay attention to certain details, you can get an idea of what time they're in. I won't reveal that. I'll let you figure that out. Now, of course, through each of these scenarios, you must complete it in order to advance the game. If you don't complete it, you can always go back to it and replay it and learn from your mistakes. Towards the end of the game, once you've completed all the scenarios, you will then venture into Am itself to try and end Am. And here also comes where the good endings appear. Because if you are successful, the biggest success, you defeat Am. One character does it, can do it, without losing any of the other characters. And in the process, you will actually free 750 cryogenically frozen humans on the moon. Which, in all essence, 750 are not enough to restore mankind. Not in a reasonable sense of time. Maybe if it was like 750,000, it could be doable. But of course, Earth has to recover because Earth has become a radiated wasteland. But of course, it's the right courses of action. Most of the endings, which are all bad, match with the ending of the story, in which the character you play gets transformed into a jelly-like creature with no mouth. Hence the title. I have no mouth, and I must scream. It's beautiful. This game is beautiful in its dystopian look. And I think it has a very beautiful pessimistic look to it as well. And I'll admit, like I said, I was not initially pleased with the cover. Now, I first saw this in a Tower Records down in King of Prussia. I don't know if it's still around. At the time, the place was a combination of, well, let's see. They had a vast group of regular, like CDs and audio cassettes, because audio cassettes were still around at that time. They had videos on VHS, because DVD had not fully made it to the norm yet at that time. They had shelves for computer games, because CD games were starting to become the norm. And when I saw this box art, it didn't appeal to me. I admit it freaked me out a little bit. And then years later, about 2019, as 2018, 2019, after my wife passed away and I got diagnosed pretty much with PTSD, I would see things starting to surface where they're talking about Harlan Ellison, and I have no mouth and I must scream. And it started appealing to me to find out what this was. I heard the short story read by Harlan himself. You can find it on YouTube. And it connected with me at this point. And I think every once in a while we need to expose ourselves to something depressing, because it is something we need to encounter. If you don't address the depressing stuff, you don't expose yourself to it, when it hits you, it's going to be a blow. And sometimes if you expose yourself to that stuff, you're going to experience it. You're going to start to learn to overcome it. If you expose yourself to it in that way, when you actually get faced with something, you'll be more mentally prepared for it. And I'll admit, I wasn't prepared for what would hit me. And playing some games like this one sort of helped. I still deal with bouts of being depressed, all linked to the PTSD. But a game, like I said, of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which depicts what should be unthinkable scenarios, can be a plus. And that's all I have to say about that. As always, thank you for listening. If you've listened to this point, subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. I appreciate that. Take care.